On today's show, Laura Heywood interviews
one of the most important theater makers I know, the inimitable creator, trendsetter, and producer, Rachel Sussman. Welcome to Laura Heywood Interviews. I'm Laura Heywood. Listen, I know a lot of artists. Many of them have appeared with me on these airwaves. I definitely use a lot of enthusiastic language to describe them. That's my trademark, of course, spreading joy through contagious enthusiasm. And when I created Laura Heywood Interviews, I specifically designed it so I would be talking only to people that I truly respect and admire, who fascinate and inspire me. So every guest I've had in the 40-plus hours of interviews I've hosted over the last 4 months is sort of a hero of mine. But I think this is one of the only times I've used the phrase most important. How to judge one artist's importance over another's? That's a difficult question. But to me, it's about how the world will have changed as a result of the person's existence on the planet. And my guest today, Rachel Sussman, is in fact changing the world. Have you heard of What the Constitution Means to Me, the Pulitzer Prize finalist and Tony-nominated Best Play? Rachel played a major role in bringing it to Broadway. Have you heard of The Woodsman, one of Off-Broadway's biggest recent hits, which also you may have seen on PBS? Rachel produced that. The New York Musical Festival, Rachel was the artistic director there for years, curating over 30 new works a year and collaborating with literally hundreds of artists. Rachel's a former Women's Project Lab Time Warner Foundation Fellow, a graduate of the Commercial Theater Institute on the Fred Vogel Scholarship, and a University Honor Scholar alumna of NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. She's the recipient of the 2019 Geraldine Stutz T Fellowship in Creative Producing, founded by Hal Prince, who called her wise, creative, energetic, and having boundless enthusiasm. She has a future in creative producing, he said. She's also the founder of Mitten Lab, the Michigan incubator of theater talent emerging now, designed to nurture performing arts in her home state. Plus, she's not only the lead producer, but also personally commissioned the creation of a new musical about Alice Paul and the women's suffrage movement that has more current buzz than any other show I'm aware of. The composer of that commission, by the way, Rachel's good friend Shaina Taub, who's currently collaborating on another new musical with Sir Elton John. Somehow, this powerhouse still has time to be a devoted activist for intersectional feminist causes, human rights initiatives, and homelessness prevention, going so far as to sleep out on the street this week to raise money and awareness for homeless youth. Plus, she's a devoted friend, traveling often to support members of her community and the work that excites both her and them. When I say I'm proud to consider myself a friend and perhaps even a peer to the future of American theater, Rachel Sussman is the embodiment of that future. Watch out, world, because she is just getting started. Welcome to Laura Heywood Interviews, Rachel Sussman.
Hey, Laura. I'm
Hi.
so happy to be here.
I'm so excited that you're here. I'm excited that you're in the studio with me, and I'm excited that you are, that you exist in a world that I live in.
Oh my gosh, thank you. And that intro, I was sitting here like, oh, wow. It was so sweet and kind, and I hope to aspire to do all of those things.
Well, I'll print out a copy for you, and you can hang it up over your desk. But the fact is, you've already done all of these things. I mean, the work that you've already created, even if that was all you ever did, it's already such good work. I mean, let's start with What the Constitution Means to Me, which is in its last few days. Or did it just close?
No, it's on Saturday.
Yeah, okay, got it.
24th.
Okay, so for people listening live, you have a few days left to see it. For those listening to the podcast version, which comes out a week later, you just missed it. Sorry, although it's going to be at the Kennedy Center. What the Constitution Means to Me is a almost one-person show by and starring Heidi Schreck and a couple of young co-stars and one
not so young
adult co-star. But it's really Heidi's story, and I saw it off Broadway, and she's been touring it or performing it regionally for a while, and it just never occurred to me as something that would go on Broadway. It felt more like she was telling me a story, sort of like if people are familiar with The Moth Storytelling Hour or something like that, as opposed to a play. And even though I saw it at a theater, at New York Theater Workshop, it just never occurred to me that it could transfer, because I'd never seen a play like that. But you had the vision to bring it, or you were part of a team that had that vision.
Yes. So Matt Ross, who is not only a well-regarded, renowned publicist in our industry, he also is a producer, and he had sort of been shepherding it when it was at New York Theater Workshop. His company, Matt Ross PR, is the publicist for New York Theater Workshop.
And it was thanks to them that I got to see it.
Exactly. And he really got behind the show. I think the show premiered at New York Theater Workshop in the fall of 2018 during a lot of political upheaval, in particular the Kavanaugh hearings, and it felt deeply resonant to experience Heidi's story, which is both personal and political, and as we all know, the personal is political these days and all days. And the show transferred to the Greenwich House Theater, formerly Barrow Street, to continue its run because there was so much enthusiasm for it. And due to some availability at the Helen Hayes, the show had an opportunity to transfer to Broadway, and for that, Matt was able to very easily convince Diana DeMena and Aaron Glick, who are our 3 lead producers, to join him in that journey. And I very luckily got to come aboard as a co-producer with my 2 colleagues, Jen Maley and Corey Stolbun, and a number of other really incredible producers to help bring the show to Broadway and tell Heidi's story on a larger platform. I felt like I wanted everyone to experience it, and there is no platform quite like the Broadway platform. And I think that this play has helped to create a shift in paradigm as we consider what kind of work is commercial, what belongs on Broadway. And following our run, which was supposed to only go through early June and then doubled its length of time on Broadway, has now been extended through August 24th. The show will go to the Kennedy Center, as Laura mentioned, September 11th through September 22nd. So those listening even after the live airing can still see it in DC, and then we will start a national tour in January 2020.
So I'm always looking for opportunities to organically mention the benefits of paying the very tiny fee to get the show live and for the first week. So if you did want to see it on Broadway and you're listening to this on the free version, you should have paid the $6.95 to get the show live. No, but I'm kidding. The show, as I always say, the podcast is available free because not everybody has $6.95 a month to throw at content, and I still want people to be able to hear these conversations. Also, can I just say as a sidebar to talking about what the Constitution means to me, I'm so glad that you're calling it the Helen Hayes Theater, because it's sort of being quietly rebranded as the Hayes Theater. I don't know if you noticed.
It's a lady theater. We have to call it by its lady name.
That's exactly right. But when it was renovated, the marquee got changed, and now it just says the Hayes. And sometimes the playbills say the Hayes, and sometimes they say the Helen Hayes. And I'm like, there's literally one theater on Broadway named for a woman. Like, let's not erase her.
And the only other one is the Barrymore, but because it's MTC? No, MTC's theater, right? The Ethel Barrymore?
No, that's the Samuel J. Friedman Theater.
Oh, Barrymore is where The Inheritance is going.
And
where Band's Visit was. Look at Laura and I having our, nerdy theater moment
that's
right
what
now.
This is about.
That's I think one of, where's Jen Tepper when you need her, to tell us the theaters named for women on Broadway. And so I want to, of course, celebrate the Helen Hayes, and also because it's a show by Heidi Schreck and celebrating what it means to be a woman in America. Actually, I would say both celebrating and interrogating what that conversation is.
Oh, I love that, interrogating. The Barrymore Theater, just to really nerd it up a little bit more, I don't think was ever called the Ethel Barrymore Theater.
No.
It was named the Barrymore because Ethel did something like 5 or 6 shows there. In fact, I think Raul Esparza is almost about to beat Ethel Barrymore in terms of number of credits on that specific stage. But the Barrymore family, it was like a famous historical Broadway family. It's actually Drew Barrymore is one of the Barrymores. So I consider that, even though Ethel was sort of made her home base there, I don't feel like she's been erased exactly because the theater was named for, it was just called, the Barrymore is its actual name. But when the Helen Hayes, its actual name is the Helen Hayes Theater, and when it's shortened, it just drives me crazy.
Me too. And I just realized while you were saying that, the other theater's the Vivian Beaumont, but both the Vivian Beaumont and Helen Hayes are now run by nonprofits, Lincoln Center and Second Stage. So there you go.
Yeah, and you're right. The Vivian Beaumont does continue to use Vivian's name. And Lunt Fontanne, one of them was a woman.
That's right.
they were a couple. Anyway, I feel like there are certain things just by, what do they say? What does Eliza Hamilton say? Inserting herself back into the narrative. just by using the full name, we're reinforcing the idea that women have always been here and they're going to continue to be here. And, no matter how you try to, or the institutions may try to erase us, it's not going to happen. Not with theater makers like you around.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's talk about some of this other stuff you've been doing. Usually I wait till the end of the show to talk about nonprofits. I always close the show to talk about an organization doing good that is special to my guest. But you just finished spending a night on the streets of New York City with a whole bunch of other theater makers for Covenant House. And I want to hear about it. I mean, not just about why Covenant House is amazing. I think that's important. But just like girlfriend to girlfriend, I want to hear about what it's like to sleep out on the street in New York, what it's like to have like Audra McDonald in the sleeping bag next to you. I'm imagining that was what happened. Just tell me everything.
Yeah, I will. So Covenant House International is a vital organization in 31 cities across 6 countries, including Latin America, that focuses on helping young homeless folks between the ages of really 16 and 21 to have an opportunity to grow their future. Young people become homeless for a number of reasons. It's a very complicated age because, you hit 18 and in the eyes of the law, you're an adult, but in many other ways, you still need a lot of support, and Covenant House is there to offer unconditional love to these young people as they're working to make their way in the world. And the Sleep Out is an initiative that Covenant House does for various sort of groups. So there's an executive edition, there's a young professional edition, there's a mother's edition, and what was originally the Broadway Sleep Out, started by Capathia Jenkins and Stephanie J. Block, has transformed these past few years into the Sleep Out Stage and Screen to expand and allow our friends in other aspects of the entertainment world to join us. So I actually have been doing it since the very first year of the Broadway Sleep Out, which was 2013.
Wow.
So this was my 7th year sleeping out. I'm also on the executive committee for the Sleep Out, along with some incredible colleagues in the industry, Audra McDonald, Stephanie J. Block, Darius DeHaas, Jeff Calhoun, and my best friend, Rachel Brosnahan, and one of our
Emmy Award winner?
Emmy Award winner, Emmy Award winner, Golden Globe winner. What hasn't she won these days?
Tony presenter.
Yes.
Mrs. Maisel herself.
Yes.
I saw that she was a recent addition to the board of directors of Covenant House.
That's right.
And I was like, I wonder if that was when it got switched to stage and screen, because she was like, yo, I want to do this, and I want to bring my TV friends.
The timing certainly aligned, is what I'll say. Sam Pinkleton, Diana DeMena, just wanted to make sure I didn't forget anybody important on that committee. And so, when we started, there were 53 participants that first year. This year, there were 110. So every year, we have a lot of return sleepers. We meet a lot of new friends, and our family just keeps getting bigger. And the Sleep Out itself, just to be clear, is not about pretending to be homeless in any way. Mm-hmm. It's a night we sleep out on the pavement in solidarity with homeless youth to say, we see you, we're here for you, and to remember that experience, which, of course, sleeping out on the street is not a comfortable experience. Mm-hmm. It is very difficult, and in New York City, it's very loud. And certainly, not like being in a bed by any means. So it's not to try and replicate what it must be like to be homeless, but just to have one night of discomfort so that the experience lingers for a long time afterwards. And I did it 7 years ago, and I felt so humbled by it to really think about, just what it means to be a human, and to say, you're also a human, and just because our circumstances are different doesn't mean that, I have a certain privilege, and I want to use my privilege, my place in this industry, as so many of my colleagues feel, to help raise money and awareness for this cause. The crisis of national youth homelessness is feels insurmountable, but in a world that especially now feels cynical and sometimes dark, giving to this cause and helping to spread the light and the mission of Covenant House is something good that I feel like we can do.
Yeah, and you've personally raised over $8,000 this year alone, and your team, Cov Love, raised like 3 times that.
Yeah, I think we're past $45,000 now. There was an intense competition with Rachel's team, the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel team, but they had a little bit of a celebrity overhaul on us. But at the end of the day, all the money goes to the same place. So if you are listening, we are still accepting donations for the next 6 weeks. So if you go to sleepoutsstageandscreen.org.
Let's find out. Sleepoutsstageandscreen.org. Yep.
Sleepoutsstageandscreen.org. You can donate to my page, to Rachel Brosnahan's page, to anyone's page. I promise all the money is going to good use to help give resources to young, formerly homeless men and women, and to help them prepare for the future and live the kinds of lives that they always dreamed of.
I agree that all the money is going to the same place and that, it's all a great cause. I disagree that people should give to whoever they want. I want them to give to you.
Okay.
Rachel Brosnahan has raised $28,862.
Ugh, I know.
Rachel Sussman has raised $8,272. So don't donate to Rachel Brosnahan's page. She's doing fine. But you can actually find both of you, along with Audra McDonald, Stephanie J. Block, Zach Levi, Sam Pinkleton, who's an incredible choreographer, great comet, etc. You can just find them by scrolling down on the left column at sleepoutsstageandscreen.org and just, look for the sassy ginger.
Yes. And Laura, also thank you, because the sleep out was on Monday night and I got 2 hours of sleep on the street, and then I took a 90-minute power nap before I had to go to work. So last night was my first night of some real sleep, and I tried to get 9 hours, and I still feel like I'm catching up. So I appreciate you bearing with me.
Oh my gosh. Well, the whole point of this show is just for me to get to hang out with friends, but specifically with friends that are either so busy or so accomplished, usually both, that, if we tried to set a time for coffee, we'd probably end up rescheduling it, and a whole year would go by, and we'd be like, I don't know, there's more important things to do. But for some reason, when I'm like, it's live, and I'm putting a microphone in front of you, and it's going to live in posterity, and we can talk about all the things you're passionate about, and get the word out to potentially tens of thousands of people listening, suddenly that hour becomes available, and here we are catching up.
It's like the best excuse for us to hang out, quite frankly.
I know. It really has been a lovely experience for me, and it's the first time that I've been able to have complete creative control. Derek and Romaine, who run DNR Studios, they're the D and the R, were colleagues of mine when I worked at SiriusXM. They were like my first friends when I moved to New York at the very beginning of 2005. And they, when they left there, I guess their advertisers started calling them and being like, we still want to give you money. Where are you going to be? And instead of doing, recording a show into their phone and uploading it to a podcast app, they created their own studio with live streaming. So their show gets tons of phone calls and interactions, and they take cruises with their listeners and stuff. It's big. They have this community that is incredible, and they contacted me and said, do you miss doing radio? And I said, yeah, I miss it so much. And they said, well, has anyone talked to you about doing a podcast? And the truth is, people have been talking to me about doing it, from the because the Broadway girl persona was anonymous for 6 years while I was at Sirius, and then I left, and right around that same time I had this big reveal, and right away people were like, do a Broadway girl podcast, and there was something in my gut that was like, I don't know that I want to call it that.
No, you already, for lack of a better term, leapt out of the closet. So,
Yeah.
why would you go back in?
I try not to use that phrasing because I feel like
I'm a lesbian, so I feel like I'm allowed to.
Right. Well, and I am. This is interesting. I haven't talked about this publicly on the airwaves. I am realizing that I may finally be out of that pesky straight phase that I've been in for the last 20 years. I mean, one of the most loving, successful relationships of my life, which lasted 2 years, was with a woman. Even then, I was like, I'm obsessed with boys. So putting a label on myself didn't really make sense to me. But, you know, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the idea of phases and how, like, I see all of these, especially now that a lot of my friends have kids, and I see their kids are going through like a horse phase, and they're like, let me get you all the horse stuff. Or like the teenagers are going through a boy band phase, and they're like, let's get you tickets to that. But God forbid they go through a phase where they like girls. And that's the only time that their parents aren't like, let's get you that stuff, until, you know, it's like, what's right? Even if it is temporary, who cares if your kid's passionate about something? And so I've reframed it. I mean, I am not dating anybody right now, and I am sort of, but I'm like, the potential is in me. It's always been in me.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that, like, in this day and age, we are more progressive than ever. I am so inspired by these young people who I'm meeting at Covenant House, and otherwise. I also did a lot of work last year at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and you know, meeting these like high school kids who are out or whatever, and they don't care. And I have this sense of, gosh, I wish that I had felt that way when I was young, and if I had been able to come to terms with that earlier, you know, would it have affected me differently? Obviously, the life I have now, I'm very happy with. But, but just to say that I find it very encouraging that more and more young people are feeling safe enough to come out and or explore who they are gender-wise, sexuality-wise at a younger age. And I think it just bodes well for what the future can hold.
I agree. And, you know, I've gone back and forth because I had a little bit of a identity crisis around Pride this year because there was so much media. This is the thing about this show. It can go in any direction. Like,
I love that we're having this chat.
Yeah, me too.
I can tell you all, I mean, there's a sort of famous-ish story about like when I first realized I was gay, so I can definitely give you that story.
Okay, cool. Well, you know what? If that's where this conversation goes, let's do it. I also like reckoning with things on the air, just letting myself talk openly, almost like I'm at therapy, because sometimes I figure out how I feel just by letting my mouth run. And when it's something that when I'm in the room with a friend who I trust, that's kind of like I have a feeling that these radio archives are going to end up being, I'll have them, what do you call it, transcribed, and then there'll be chapters in my book. So this will be a good one to have a recording of.
Laura discovers your sexuality on air.
I mean, look, I am not discovering anything. I am basically allowing myself to belong in the community that I've always felt like was my community. There was so much. I mean, I identified as queer when I was 16, and then I fell in love with a girl when I was 20, and we were together till I was 22. And then I've really only dated men since, and I was obsessed with boys from when I was in kindergarten. So, you know, the idea that like being bisexual means that you have equal interests at all times and that it doesn't flow at all, you know, like that word never really resonated with me, and it stopped being like a practical definition. Queer stopped being a practical definition of how I was living. So I kind of just defaulted it was like if I was asked on a census what my sexual orientation was, I probably would have said bi because of, I don't know.
The legality.
Well, or just like visibility, representation. But I just, like when I was on dating apps, I was generally looking to date men. And so, I mean, I was just looking to date men. So I just put straight because it made the most sense in the context. But now, and then when Pride came around this year, there was so much media coverage about Pride tourism and people showing up to see like either the freaks or the like people being like, I like glitter and rainbows too. This is going to be my day. And, you know, how that compared to the Stonewall era and the protest element of Pride, and, you know, people who had to fight to have their identities recognized even when I was in this very visible relationship, aside from people who were like, aren't you obsessed with boys? I'm confused. I didn't ever have, you know, I wasn't ever discriminated against in any way. And so I kind of was like, Plus, like, I don't know, just I was coming to terms with my own privilege and my own heteronormativity, which is sort of what I feel like my sexual orientation is, heteronormative. Anyway, I'm word vomiting right now, but I skipped Pride. I stayed home in my apartment because I was like, I don't want to get in the way of like actual queer people. I need to let them have their day. And I was so sad. Like,
Next time, you can go to Pride with me.
thanks. Next time I'm going to go by myself because you know what? I'm a color in that rainbow too.
You are. And I mean, I always think like in particular this year, rainbow capitalism be damned, like however you want to celebrate it. It is interesting how commercialized Pride became this year with Stonewall 50th in particular. But, you know, there were thinking about how many people felt like they could go out and celebrate Pride. And next year, I want you to feel that way, too.
Thank you. I feel like it took that with me feeling lost, like I'm not there with my people. And that, like, the B in LGBT is a real thing, and it doesn't get a lot of visibility, but it more and more is having visibility with, you know, with characters on TV shows who don't necessarily identify as anything, but, like, they're dating a girl one day and a guy, you know, on the next episode, and it just, like, isn't. And I'm like, that is bisexuality, and the B is in there.
Yep.
And
follow the heart.
If I need to show Exhibit A and Exhibit B and Exhibit C to like prove my queerness, I can.
Right.
But I can also just like not have to and be like, these are my people and this is who I feel happiest around, and like my best friends are here, and we're all fighting for equal rights for everyone. It's like when I hear you talk about feminism and you're like, it literally means that we're all equal. Like, that's it.
Yes.
And it doesn't, you know, we're not putting anybody down. We're just saying like equal respect and equal rights for everybody.
Totally. And even like, I mean, when I talk about feminism, I've been trying to spend a lot of time in particular, like really exploring intersectionality and what it means as even as a lesbian, as a white person, to recognize the privilege that I have and to help sort of always be aware and creating more space and decentering, you know, where I sit at the table to give those who are more marginalized and have historically not had a seat at the table that room.
Yeah.
It's all about, for me, like always creating more space, and that even though I am gay, like the privilege I do have with my race to help make that happen and try and like be a better listener and take care and be a better ally to, in particular, women of color, LGBTQ people of color, and of course like men of color, all people of color, but trans women of color in the Pride movement.
I think, you know, we all have our privilege, and I think about it all the time. Like, you and I are both able-bodied also, you know, and I'm making an assumption here, but I think we're both cisgendered. I am cisgendered.
I am cisgendered
and I think
as well.
that, you know, the more that we can focus on raising up voices of people who don't look like us, we're not raised like us. And the more we listen and lift each other up, the better the world will be as a whole.
Exactly. And that sort of even ties back to Covenant House, which is to say, like, a lot of their youth have been kicked out of homes because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And that Covenant House, I'm thinking about this quote in particular because the president, Kevin Ryan, is such an inspiring leader. But he said, our culture is not one of tolerance. Tolerance is like baseline for these organizations. Their culture at Covenant House is one of celebration.
Good. Well, I'm excited to have made I don't know, excited, proud, but like the least I could do really was to donate to your page.
Thank you.
To your Covenant House fundraiser. And again, it's Sleep Out Stage and Screen, all spelled out.org. Scroll down, find Rachel Sussman, and give whatever you can. While we're on the subject of trans people of color, I want to just take a moment and acknowledge there was a suicide recently of a guy named Reese who was dating a trans woman.
I saw that.
And he was like bullied so harshly in his community that he died by suicide. And I feel like we need to all be saying his name and his girlfriend's name, Kat, like that it's not okay, and we see them and we love them and we support them.
Exactly. And we just have to do a better job in the fight to normalize living while trans living, you know, loving who you love, always. In all parts of the country. Obviously, it's a little easier here in New York than other places.
This is like the most serious I've ever gotten on this show, like whether
God.
about sort of my own like behind the scenes stuff, or I mean, although I certainly have talked a lot about like Black Lives Matter and our mutual friend Ty Defoe, who's a queer non-binary artist, was my second guest on the show, and I you know, so like it's not like I am just being like, so what's your favorite show?
No, this is honestly, I'm very grateful that this is what you use this podcast and your live show to talk about, that it's, you know, it's not just what's your favorite show, but also like who are you as a person and like what do you care about, what are you willing to fight for in this world.
And that's exactly why I didn't listen to any of the consultants or any of the previous radio producers who were like, you have an existing brand, people will search the word Broadway, they will find you, that's how you make money, we're doing the Broadway Girl show. And I was like, I would rather do a show where I can go off on a tangent and be like, I may date only men for the rest of my life, but I can still march at Pride because I'm still in that rainbow, you know, and I can talk about, you know, any of this stuff the same way that you and I would be talking about it over coffee, because I feel like that's what people are lacking from the creators that they may know through their work. They don't necessarily know how they talk to their friends and what they really care about. I think sometimes people assume that the people making very visible work are just like, I'm amazing because I made this thing, or that people be like, what's Rachel Brosnahan really like? Or, you know, did you ever get to play with the puppets from the Woodsman? And, you know, while I'm curious about those things, they're really, in the grand scheme of things, not that important to me. I'd rather ask you, like, how did you first learn about Alice Paul, and where did the idea of commissioning, no less, a musical about her life? And first, can you just tell people who Alice Paul is?
Absolutely. Alice Paul is an American suffragist. This is my favorite thing to talk about because I can't tell you the number of people who go, how's your suffragette show coming? And I go, oof, and my heart breaks a little, which is no one's fault. It's just we have done such a poor job educating people on who suffragists were, and that suffragette was a very diminutive term.
Yeah.
It represented...
It's like stewardess.
Yeah, and everyone thinks of Mary Poppins and that song, and that's like the image in their head. And quite frankly, that was a suffragette. Suffragettes were British, and it was seen as a negative connotation in America because Alice Paul, who did study in Britain with Emmeline Pankhurst and her organization, and practiced those tactics of nonviolent civil disobedience, really came to America and combined this idea of civil disobedience with peaceful pacifist protest. So they were less unruly and militant than the British.
Less unruly. They were more ruly?
They were less unruly. Yeah, they were more ruly.
They were rulier.
They were rulier. I said that and I was like, does that make sense?
I don't know.
They were less, they were still very radical. The idea, Alice, in many ways pioneered very early civil disobedience in this country, and like little history lesson because I'm such a nerd about this history, and the American suffrage movement, which is wildly complex and messy and full of a lot of conversations regarding whose stories haven't been told. Alice Paul really did pioneer those very early days of nonviolent civil disobedience here.
What year are we talking about?
So Alice Paul's a Quaker from New Jersey. She studied in London in the early 20th century, so like 1909 to 1912-ish. She had a PhD from UPenn. Like, she was so badass, so smart.
Dang.
And so ahead of her time in many ways, which is unfortunate when we consider, like, even today, women being told, you know, you're out of line, or, you know, you aren't allowed to say that. And it's like, well, when do we get to say that?
Oh my gosh, that reminds me of what's going on with the Parkland kids and the gun violence and this.
It all sort of, it feels like, in studying this movement and thinking about where we are now, so much of it is cyclical. A lot of history is cyclical, the way that movements operate, the way that progress, there's always progress, but in some ways it's not as fast as we would hope. So Alice Paul came to the United States after she studied in the UK and wanted to fight for a federal suffrage amendment. And as I'm sure many listeners know, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were at the forefront of the suffrage movement, Seneca Falls, and involved very heavily.
People think they invented it.
People think they invented it, which, you know, they were sort of in the very early days and pioneers of that. But they passed away before the suffrage amendment got passed. So they passed away before it got passed. Mm-hmm. And Alice Paul and this sort of like third generation were responsible for the 19th Amendment getting passed, which is going to be 99 years ago. It was 99 years ago that the amendment was ratified on August 18th, and it will be 99 years since it was signed into law on August 26th. So we're coming up on the centennial, obviously.
Do you already have stuff planned for a year from this week?
I mean, do you know me?
That means she probably has things planned not only for a year, this week, next year, but also like this week, the year after that, and the year after that.
For the rest of time.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I started learning about this history, which I think was your original question, how did you become obsessed with Alice Paul? When I was in 7th grade, my U.S. history class, we were given an opportunity to do a project on any subject turn of the 20th century.
Tell me this was a dress-up project.
Oh, God, I so wish I had a little, like, suffragist outfit and photos of me in it. I have lots of other crazy photos, though, I promise. But
and your Instagram is at Rach Suss?
It is. Yeah, yes. Stay tuned. But I became really interested in the suffrage movement. I went to my middle school library, and there was really nothing available there, and I had to go to my city library and this was, you know, before people were really using the computer to do this kind of research. I'm young, but also
yeah, like
this was like circa 2001.
So was there microfiche involved? Do you even know what microfiche is? I'm older than you.
No, I don't. There was Ask Jeeves involved, though.
Oh yeah. Okay, so microfiche was like an analog internet. You go to the library and you'd find these, like, they sort of looked like canisters, and it was almost like a little newsreel that you had to put into a machine, and then you look through this eyepiece, and that was a magnifying glass, and it was newspaper articles that were printed really, really tiny so that they could fit all of these archives, and you'd stick it into the machine, and then you'd have to like spin through it till you found the issue of the. It's like
I'm recalling like this existing, but I was much more of a Dewey Decimal System person. I was going to the library to find books.
Okay, got it.
So I mean, the internet did exist, and like I probably could have asked Jeeves about this, but I chose not to. I don't remember why.
Oh man, I feel like we are gonna I grew up with a great aunt who like remembered before there were cars. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's like, it was almost like she was from a different planet. And I feel like that's how people are going to be.
Oh yeah, I also feel like it's weird. I tend to think that my age group is sort of the last generation to exist without cell phones in schools, like in grade school. I didn't get a cell phone until I was in like 8th grade.
I didn't get a cell phone till the year after college. Mm-hmm. And even then, it was a brick that I shared with my whole family, and whoever needed it that day would take it. I had moved home for 6 months after college, and we all would just be like, who needs the cell phone today?
Unbelievable.
Emergencies only.
I had a Nokia.
Yeah, that's what it was.
I could play Snake. I got very good at Snake.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine people still like playing Snake
Well,
and being
it came
the cool
back
thing?
this year on April 1st. You know, Google always does a little April Fool's something or other. They made it possible to play Snake in Google Maps so that you'd like go around the New York City or wherever your Google Maps were, and you could play Snake on the maps. It's like, yeah, that sounds about right.
That's amazing. Kudos, Google.
Okay, so you learned about Alice Paul when you were in 8th grade using Ask Jeeves. You were like, "Dear Jeeves, who's Alice Paul?" And at some point between then and now, you went, "That just screams jazz hands to me. This belongs on Broadway."
When I read about it and I did this presentation, which I probably got an A on, but I can't remember because that
Of
was
course
the kind
you
of kid
did.
I was. I always felt like, oh, this feels like, even then, and I was such a theater nerd, so this was coming out of a place of knowledge that I thought this feels like really ripe content for a musical.
We should mention that you were doing theater from a really young age with your whole family, including your dog.
That is fully correct. I grew up in the Metro Detroit area. I did a ton of competitive dance. I started doing community theater when I was a preteen, and then my mom convinced my dad to audition with her for a community theater production of Fiddler on the Roof, which all the humans in my family did. And then we did a production of Annie in which I starred as Annie.
I mean, duh, you can sing and you have red hair.
And I have red hair. That was like
You're a
the
white
most
kid
important
with red
thing.
hair who
Yeah.
can sing.
And the craziest part of all of this is my family's dog, Cosmo, who was a black and white miniature schnauzer, got cast in the role of Sandy. So I call him Sandy because of his sandy colored fur suddenly took on a like very weird meaning.
Well, there are lots of different colors of sand.
Totally. He was like 6 months old. He hated it. And he actually did perform in other shows before he retired from his show business
Rachel,
career.
Colorblind casting?
Duh, of
Please.
course. And yeah, just as a little shout out to my dad, who after my sister and I both went to college, my dad got even more deeply involved in his community theater, where he now serves on the board for the playwriting group. He is a playwright, director, scenic designer, actor, fight choreographer. He does it all, and his energy I find to be such an inspiration to me as someone who, he's an architect by day and this is his hobby and he loves it more than anything.
Is he still in the Detroit area?
Yes, my family is in like southeast outside of Detroit.
So does it have a mile number? Or is that just urban
yeah.
Detroit?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
The only reason I mean,
does.
obviously we've all seen 8 Mile. But also my most recent guest, Monday's guest, was Juwan Jackson, who's currently starring in Ain't Too Proud, who's from Detroit. Mm-hmm. And he's from 7 or 9 Mile. I remember it was one away from 8 Mile.
Yeah. So,
and that's the extent of like what I know about Detroit geography.
That's very good, and I can't believe you brought that up. I grew up off of a street called Maple, which is also known as 15 Mile, but nobody calls it 15 Mile. So there you go. Yes, so I was on a mile road. And my family always obviously encouraged me to like follow my heart and do this crazy thing called theater. And I initially thought about making this a musical and was like, whatever, someone will do that. Mm-hmm. And then this HBO TV movie came out called Iron Jawed Angels, which does sort of follow Alice Paul. And I saw it and I was like, oh, this is interesting. This isn't exactly what I would think of in adapting for the stage. But again, I sort of like put that aside. I went to college. I went to go be an actor and then decided I want to really make the thing and be a collaborator from the beginning. Also, I'm a Capricorn, so I'm very controlling, and I needed to be in control.
Is that's a thing about Capricorns? Astrology is like not my jam.
There's so much sanctuary. There's so many astrology apps right now, and I always dug astrology and Chani Nichols and everything that she would say.
I don't know that.
Chani Nichols is an incredible astrologer who writes amazing horoscopes for the future. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners are like, yes, we love Chani.
I'm sure they do. I mean, people there are so many things I don't know about because the things that I choose to immerse myself in, I get so obsessed. There's just not that much bandwidth.
Oh,
like
for sure.
I think I've seen 3 movies in the theater in the last year, and probably 2 of them were adaptations of Broadway shows.
God. Yeah.
And like one was actually probably more than a year ago. Like I went to see Black Panther because I was like, I'm voting with my dollars on this one, you know?
That was one of the movies to see if you were going to go see 3. But I am a Capricorn. Other famous Capricorns: Alexander Hamilton, Alice Paul.
Well, I was going to say that I've actually been sort of trying to avoid mentioning Alexander Hamilton because I feel like a lot of times, including me, I did an interview with Shaina, and I was like, no musical's had this much buzz since Hamilton. And weren't you in the audience for that?
I was in the audience
you
for
were
that.
there. And I remember being like, why did I have to do that? Why do I have to like compare it to like what? So many women are, instead of just being like, she's amazing, it's like, she's as amazing as this man. And like, why can't your thing just be the thing instead of having to be the thing compared to the thing?
I agree.
do think that Alice Paul is about to undergo a similar name recognition surge as a result of
The centennial
of, I was going to say the musical, but sure. I think that, 5 years ago, probably a lot of people thought Alexander Hamilton was a president, and now they don't because a piece of pop culture
Totally.
like elevated his name recognition, and I think that that's likely to happen to Alice Paul as well once this musical of yours.
Yeah, listen, we're cooking it, and I will say though that it's not a bio musical about Alice Paul. It's really about Alice Paul, who represented in many ways like the young radical and this visionary who wanted to fight for a federal amendment, and the more experienced moderate leader of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, known as NASA, Carrie Chapman Catt, who was fighting for suffrage state by state, which was a slower, more incremental change versus sort of all things now. And so the show sort of explores the tension between both ends of that spectrum. How do you fight for the exact same thing with totally opposing methods? And then there are other characters of major interest who are all based off of historical figures, namely Ida B. Wells, famous suffragist and anti-lynching activist.
Speaking of intersectionality, like, do you want to just do like the
Spiel?
elevator pitch about Ida?
Yeah, so Ida is probably most famously regarded for, she participated in this massive parade on Washington, which was for women's suffrage the day before President Woodrow Wilson's inauguration in 2017.
The original Women's March.
The original Women's March was March 3rd, 1913, and Alice Paul was orchestrating this massive parade, and it included pageants and all these floats, and Ida B. Wells came to Alice and said, I hear you want all of the black women to march in the back. And this was a very complicated issue, and quite frankly, not that complicated now. But Alice was very anxious about alienating Southern voters and afraid that if women of color were marching alongside the white women, it wouldn't help the cause, which was the choice she made. And now that haunts us in a lot of ways, and a lot of the choices that the white leaders of the suffrage movement made because they thought that they had to make them in order to get a little progress.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is not a one-time story. I mean, President Obama claimed to not believe in gay marriage when he was running for president. And I personally, have a hunch that was a compromise he was willing to make so that he could get elected, and that he was never against it, but that he was like, okay, the incremental change is more important, and then once I'm in the office, we can do something about it. So, and I believe the same is true for Abraham Lincoln, that he did not campaign on ending slavery, but he might have always believed in it and wanted to and intended to, but politics I don't know whether politics is named after politicking or politicking is named after politics, but like it's always been done and it's still being done.
Oh yeah. And I mean, the compromises.
That's not an excuse for it.
No, not at all. And the compromises these women made came at the cost of, in particular, women of color.
But Ida marched in the front.
But Ida was like, I really wanted to say a word that I'm not sure I should say on air. Can I say whatever I want?
You can say whatever you want.
Okay. Ida was sort of like, fuck this. And
you can definitely
was told
say that.
to march in the back and just sort of made her way to the front anyway. And Alice, like, there was nothing anyone could do and probably nothing anyone wanted to do.
So is that a moment in your musical?
I don't want to give anything away,
that's
but I
fair.
did talk about it. So, but all this is to say that I think when young me at 12 years old was like, why isn't this a musical? I wonder if people were afraid or unsure of how to tackle the issues of race and class in the early feminist movement, and that's something that our creative team has spoken about at length and want to make sure that we're telling the story as authentically as we can and in all of its messy, complicated glory and all of the politically expedient choices that were made over the sort of justice-based ones, and how that was its own conversation that continues today.
Well, I can't wait to see it. I absolutely 100% expect to get invited to the next perform. Like, I guess you wouldn't even call it a performance or production, but like the next time there's an audience in the room, I want in. I want in.
I'll see what I can do about that.
Yeah. Do you know anybody who?
And I also do want to say that I am, of course, this was an idea I had, and Shaina and I have been working on it together now for 5 years, but we brought into the fold my brilliant producing partner, Jill Furman, and our director, Lee Silverman, and we're
She's
sort
my
of
favorite.
building out the rest of our creative team now with so many genius brains that I can't wait to share that with everyone.
Did I mischaracterize you when I called you lead producer?
No, that's correct. But Jill's also, she's my lead producing partner.
Got it. Okay, so we have about 8 minutes left in the show.
Oh my God.
Actually, no, we've got to get out of here a little bit early because for live listeners, Donnie's coming up at 1, so we end at 57.
Okay.
Usually this would be when I'd be like, tell me about your charity of choice. I'm going to remind people that we talked about Covenant House earlier and that they can donate at
stageandscreensleepout.org.
It's not sleepoutsstageandscreen.org.
Oh.
I've been giving it wrong.
No, you might be right. You were the one looking at the website. It probably is Sleep Out, Stage and Screen.
Sleepoutsstageandscreen.org.
Honestly, if you get confused, just Google it. I'm sure
or
it'll come
just
up.
Google Covenant House and give them some money. Like, it doesn't have to be through this. Or like the homeless shelter of your choice. Like, let's just make a difference in the world. It doesn't all have to go to the exact same place. But Covenant House, sleepoutsstageandscreen.org. So that's what I would normally be doing at the end of the show. We did that early in the show. But you opened a door earlier that we never walked through, which is, you said, I have a really great story about the first time I thought maybe I was a lesbian.
Yeah.
So you said it that way, and I want to know that story.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So this is also probably a good moment for me to plug Love and Hate Nation, which is another show I'm producing that'll be at Two River Theater this fall, which deals with a lot of queer themes. Mm-hmm. So I felt like I wanted to get involved and support Joy Conness, who's writing that show. So when I was 6, I saw, no, I must have been older than 6. I must have been 8. Somewhere in that age range, mm-hmm. I saw Titanic for the first time on 2-part VHS at home. And I saw it with my mom because, you know, I love history and my parents were very progressive and open and wanted me to learn about the sinking of the Titanic. And my mom fast forwarded through the part where Jack paints Rose like one of his French girls. Uh-huh. And so then my parents like left and went out for the night and a babysitter came over and I thought I was being very coy and I like rewound to that part specifically. And I was looking at the TV and the doorway to the family room was behind me. And what I didn't know is that my babysitter was standing in the doorway, sort of like watching me do this, and finally made her appearance known and was like, "Hi, are you allowed to watch that? And I stumbled and said, oh, yeah. Like, my mom, like, just skipped it earlier. Like, I'm totally allowed. And I had a major, major crush on Kate Winslet. She was, like, probably my first crush. And I told the story very recently to Lauren Marcus, recently of Be More Chill on Broadway. And she was my Secret Santa for the Joe Iconics Christmas show this year. And she got me the photo of Rose painted like one of the French girls and wrapped it. And there was this beautiful note. And now I have it in my home.
Is it the drawing, or
It's
is it
the
like a
drawing.
still from the...
No, it's the drawing that Jack
wow.
did, because I was telling the story and I found that to be honestly the most on point of Secret Santa gifts.
Yeah. And good on Lauren.
She pays attention.
So speaking of this show that you are co-producing?
So I'm involved with Jen Tepper, Jen Maley, and Corey Stolbun as the commercial producers for its future life.
Okay, got it. The show is called Love and Hate Nation. It's going to be at Two River Theater. And I am hosting a special event about the show Love and Hate Nation at the Guggenheim Museum, which feels fancier than I've ever felt in my life.
You are fancy now.
I guess, on October 20th. And here's what's so special about it. This is actually before previews begin, but we're going to be talking about the show in process. And tickets are like not cheap generally, but they're doing a special pay your age for this particular event, starting with age 10. And I believe that it's up to 35 or 40. I think it's 35. Oh, yeah, ages 10 to 35. So if you go to Guggenheim, worksinprocess.org. I think it's just worksinprocess.org. You can get tickets to that. I assume, Rachel, you'll be there?
I will be there.
Yay.
And then we start our performances on November 9th at Two River, which is a hop, skip, and a New Jersey train ride away from New York.
Love and Hate Nation, the Alice Paul suffragist musical. Google Rachel Sussman. She has so much amazing stuff going on. We're up against the clock. I love you. Thank you for listening to Laura Heywood Interviews.
Thank you.